Good afternoon and welcome to the Chicago Money Show. We help you get informed, feel engaged, and have fun with your finances. I'm your host, Bridget Sullivan-Ramel. I own a family financial planning practice in Chicago. Our guest today is Kacie Swartz. Although to me, she's pretty young. She's been in the financial industry for 20 years. We're going to be talking about what to focus on when you or a loved one is starting their first job, how to handle benefits, how to make sense of 401ks and Roths, what to expect financially when you start a family. And we're taking your calls. So call us at the number on the screen and ask your questions. A bit more on Kacie. She's an advisor at Stone Wealth Management in Austin, Texas, and speaks frequently on personal finance and has published in national media outlets such as Real Simple, Money Magazine, and Kiplinger's. Welcome, Kacie.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about when you're starting your first full-time job. What do you tell people when they're first starting out?
What I like to start everybody off with is a general sense of you can't do everything immediately. So pick a particular thing that you care about and start there. And for me, if it's your very first full-time job or any time you change jobs, really, a deep dive on what the benefits are is your first line of defense so that you can see what you want to take advantage of immediately and what's available if your life changes.
Cool. So about savings, how much do you recommend? So do you say start savings right away, or are you focused on let's make sure you get your benefits going?
Well, to me, it really depends on the individual's money needs and what their home life is like. Absolutely, does everybody need an emergency savings account? Of course. But I think there's a few different ways to accomplish that. And that might be through having, if your job is a nice, reliable job that you don't feel is too much at risk of you losing that job, then it might be safe to simply have a credit card with a high limit because the chances of you being out of work are slim. Alternatively, if you're doing something a little more risky, you might want to have a little bit more saved in cash money. Or maybe you live at home, maybe you live on your own. Everything's really different. So the one thing that I know for sure is that people just really want to read through the documentation about their benefits package. And maybe they don't take advantage of all of that, maybe not to the maximum at least, but they can see what's free and what is close to free, right? Things like that accidental death and dismemberment insurance. Why not? It's free. Things along those lines. I think everybody should take advantage of kind of reading through that documentation to see what they can get.
That makes a lot of sense. So you're saying okay, first start out, think about what's free and make sure you're taking advantage of what's free, and then evaluate it, take a look at it. And that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so, and you mentioned a credit card. So a viewer was asking me about this. So let's break down credit cards a little bit. Do you recommend that people get credit cards when they're in college? So this is even before first job for some people, or if they're at a tech school or something. What are your thoughts about that? Some people like to do it to get their credit rating going, but I know some parents worry about it because they don't want their kids to get overwhelmed before they even really have a solid source of income. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think that all of that kind of goes back even younger in that learning about money should be something that comes on gradually, and it's something that you learn at age-appropriate points. You learn the age-appropriate things about money. That might be 5 gold stickers equals 1 candy bar when you're 4 years old. Or it might be, you have a $500 credit limit when you're 21, right? So I think those things are all kind of a perspective element, but building credit having a long tenure on that credit card is one of the biggest points that you see in a credit score. So I think as long as the person is fairly responsible, and the type of people that are watching Chicago Money Now are probably people that care about this kind of thing,
Yeah.
then I don't think it could hurt to establish that. And
Right.
I think that having your own credit card is the real thing there. I think we've all run into those clients where they were a joint owner or a secondary owner, and that didn't build their credit.
Mhm.
And that's unfortunate if and when the time comes in their future where maybe that primary owner is not there anymore. Well, now they don't have the same credit score that they would have if they had credit in their own name.
Interesting. Okay, great. So we've got a call, so we're going to stop talking now and get to ask the caller. So caller, if you can tell me your first name and the neighborhood you're calling from, and then you can proceed with your question.
Hi, great. Good afternoon. My name's Harry. I'm calling from the bush, as far southeast side of Chicago.
Nice.
I just bought a house. Really excited, but I need a fence, and they're extremely expensive, and I know I'm going to have to finance it. So, can you talk about what options that new homeowners have for financing rehabilitations, or just getting the place ready to live in? Thanks, and I'll let you answer offline. Thanks.
Thanks. That's a great question, Jared. Kacie, have at it.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's one of those things that kind of stinks whenever you move into a new place. There's always something that you need to do. And so I think that there's two routes to that. Number one, if you do have any kind of savings set aside before you make the purchase, that's always a good thing to do because you do know that that's going to happen. You might have to repaint, you might have to get a new couch, you might have to build a fence. But yeah, man, gosh, it's so expensive right now, especially with the supply chain shortages and all of that, and labor and all of those different elements that are making fences especially expensive. I think that, again, you've got two routes. You could either use that credit card to put, if the fence is an immediate need, or you could put it off and maybe save up a little bit of cash so that you have more towards the fence and maybe hope that labor costs go down a little bit more. Bridget, what are you thinking?
I think that it makes what you said makes a lot of sense. Okay, so let's move on to going back to people coming back from out of school. So what about education? Do you think, so you're just done with your undergraduate degree, let's say, or just got out of college and you're in your first job, and now when does it make sense to think about more education, or is it worth it? How do you evaluate that?
I think it all comes down to what is your career path. I think the biggest mistake, the one thing I would avoid, is taking on a whole lot of school debt because you don't know what you want to do. I think that is so incredibly expensive, and the interest rates are terrible, and there's not a lot of ways to get out of it. So I wouldn't take it on unless you really know that this is necessary for where my career path is going.
So I think we've got another call. So caller, if you're there, if you can give us your first name and the neighborhood you're calling from.
Hi, this is Rob from Avondale. And living in the city is really expensive. And being a little younger, I was just wondering, how important is it to buy a house in the city for investment? Or if not, with people being transient and everything, what other ways can we save and, save our money for retirement? Does everything have to go into home ownership?
Great question, Rob. Kacie, what are your thoughts?
Well, Rob, you're talking to the right people because, of course, we think that there's lots of ways to build your wealth,
right,
and real estate is only one of them. And frankly, can be one of the more time-intensive and more labor-intensive. So absolutely, buying a house is not necessarily for everybody, especially if you're not sure you're going to live there. When I was 22, I thought I needed to own a home, so I bought a house in my hometown of Wichita, Kansas. And at 23, I moved. And then I had to figure out what to do with my house, right? And so I rented it for a little bit, but property management from out of state is not great, okay? And so eventually I did sell it. And now, with hindsight, 25 years later, whatever it's been, I can see that home values in that particular town didn't go up the same way that they are in places like Chicago or in Austin, Texas, where I'm living. And so that actually worked out great for me. But that's not one of the things that you know in the moment. You kind of know more like, how does this work with my current cash flow, with my current time responsibilities, and with the lifestyle that I want to lead, you know? So absolutely, build that retirement savings through your brokerage account, your 401k, your Roth IRA. All of those different more liquid vehicles are sometimes a little more easy to travel with if you don't know that you're going to be in the same place for 5, 10, 20 years.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I took a different path. So I didn't buy my first house until and I bought a condo, and I was 38. And so I was in no rush personally to buy a house. And it's because I felt like I really wanted the flexibility to move whenever I felt like it and not be tied down. Just like your point about and what I usually tell people is don't buy a house unless you plan on being somewhere for 5 years. And so, which I think is about reasonable. And so people can kind of judge that. Do I think I'm going to be here for 5 years, or am I going to move? And then I love this question because it leads us to another one of my questions for you, which is about mortgages. I like to ask all my guests, and we have a wide variety of answers about how much money you should put down and how you handle your first mortgage. And I think that you're going to be on the opposite end than me. So go for it.
I think I am too. So again, big asterisk on all of these answers is that it has to be right for the individual, of course. But I think that when you look at your housing budget and you can see that maybe there might be a little bit of a range on what you can afford for your monthly housing expenses, then that should translate into a percentage of how much down payment. And what I want to see is as little down payment as possible. Because right now, interest rates are at a historic low. And if you take on that debt, and assuming that it's a 30-year conventional fixed mortgage, money is never going to be this cheap again. And that's also relative to the inflation rate. 20 years from now, a $500,000 house may not be nearly what it costs now. And your income might go up in the same way. So that's my position. What's the opposite?
Yeah, I'm totally opposite. So I had a house, when my husband and I were married, we had a house and it was underwater. And actually the first house that I bought, I put 10% down, but then I just didn't really realize how much other things were going to cost. And so I ended up being house poor. And so now I recommend people put 20% down and save money so you have a bunch of money. And that's just because I've been burned. So that's the way it goes. That's okay. Okay, so I want to switch gears now and talk about starting a family. Okay, so we're going to move, starting a family. Okay, so let's say you are thinking about it, or you actually know you're going to have started a family. What do you tell people? What are the things that you should do, kind of before you start, before the baby arrives?
Find out how much daycare costs in your community, because it is the number one expense. It's my daycare costs. I have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. It's more than my mortgage. It's so incredibly expensive, and it's so invaluable. The people who work at our daycare are angels and saints, and I love them so much for taking good care of my girls. And it makes it so that I can do my day job and grow my career at the same time. So it's a worthwhile expense, but it's one of the few things that you actually know with a hard, fast number, right? You don't know how many diapers your kid's going to go through, or if they're going to need formula, or how many cute outfits they need. But daycare is a set expense. And so that's one of those things that when you're having nesting brain, you actually can do some numbers on. And I feel that gives you a little bit of a feeling of control and a little bit of certainty if you know what you're going to do post birth or post maternity leave or paternity leave.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So what about things like a will?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, how do you focus on that, or do you wait until after the baby's born and then deal with that stuff?
Well, honestly, that could be something that you also accomplish before those kiddos go up. My husband and I, we went through our estate planning like 2 or 3 years before the girls were born. And they probably need to be updated now, but that's not nearly as difficult as like having those conversations with your partner about who actually is the guardian of these make-believe children. Those can be conversations that go on for months or years. So absolutely, getting that estate planning done is so imperative, because it also means not only do you have the guardianship handled, but you also have those really hard conversations about end of life for you and your partner before you kind of get really emotional about what that means for your kiddos, because everything's so much harder when they have their sweet little faces staring at you.
Right. And also another thing that I think that a lot of people miss is life insurance. So I'm not the person that's telling everybody go get life insurance at all times. But the people that I do tell that life insurance is important is when they're thinking about, or when they're having a baby. So can you tell me your experience with that?
Yeah, I know everyone's positions vary on life insurance, so I just want to say that my personal belief is life insurance is temporary, and therefore it should be term life.
Term.
I like a 20-year term life, which of course means that it's a lot like your car insurance. You pay the bill, they say we'll cover you if you die, and that's it. And they set the premiums, of course, for a certain amount of years. So I have 20-year term, and that's going to get me covered until my girls are adults. And it's cheap. I mean, comparatively, it's so cheap, especially if you're in your younger years. You could potentially get, maybe $1 million of coverage, and it's going to cost you $1,200 a year. I mean, it's not that bad as a risk management system for one of the worst things that can happen to your family.
Right. I think people they're not thinking about it. Now, so how do you coordinate, because a lot of people do have some life insurance through work. But, when I first start working with people, a lot of times they're like, I've got it through work. And then I'm recommending a bunch more. So how do you help people there with that question?
The work insurance is gravy. It's just gravy. I tell everybody, sign up for the amount that's free. It's usually 2 times your income. But you don't know that you're going to be at that job forever. The average person in the U.S. is at a job for 4 years these days? You don't know that you're going to be at that particular job, God forbid, the moment that you get hit by a car. And it's one of those things where you have to think about how the math works. If you're an individual person and the actuaries are saying, what are the chances that you individually die out of everybody? It's a low number. So that's why it's pretty cheap if you're just covering yourself. On the alternative, if you're in the pool with all of the other workers, that's why it may not be as good a choice to do the buy-up through work, because you don't know if you're going to be there, and it might be just as cheap to get it on your own. And then it's transportable.
Yeah, that makes sense. And another point I wanted to mention is, what do you think about, sometimes people have one person's working and the other person is staying at home. How do you handle that? Do you recommend insurance for the caregiver?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And 2 things there. Number one, that caregiver is doing some real work. Have you ever seen those posters or memes about if you did every job that a home caregiver does, how they be earning over $100,000 a year? That's real work, and it costs big money to replace all of those things that the home person does. So absolutely, do they need coverage? And number 2, I personally think it also just shows the value that the partner has in the person who stays home by saying your work matters and this is worth covering.
Right.
I think that is a conversation between two people, of course, but most of the time, like, yeah, that's going to be expensive.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I was surprised with, because I used to like go through people's expenses once they started having a baby and help them try to sort it out, like what should they be spending money on. And I found like the average on it was always just a category called Target. And it was like $1,000 a month. And I'm like, okay, Target, what about that? Like, that's, and so there's just like a lot of basic expenses that
are they expensive? Or is it me spending $128 on Easter nonsense? I totally get it.
I read one time that the average, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I think something like this probably is, that the average like couple leaves the hospital with $10,000 in credit cards debt, more than, just because there's so much stuff. Even if you've had a lot of baby showers, there's just a lot of stuff that you have to deal with. Mm-hmm. So do you have any ideas about how to either plan for that or to minimize it?
Well, first thing is, those buy nothing, sell nothing groups on Facebook are invaluable. Yeah. Craigslist, Facebook, Nextdoor, all of these different groups, everybody's trying to give away their baby clothes. I've got boxes and boxes of them in my closet that we're outgrowing, and I'm just waiting for friends' babies to get to the right size. So absolutely use your network for all of those different things and kind of planning ahead.
Right.
If your kiddo is just born or 3 months, but you've got friends who have clothes for an 18 months, well, then, kind of plan ahead. How big's my kid going to be next summer? Then that's when you get the things like the jumper or the kids, the Strider bike, any of these things that are a little more expensive. If you have places to store that stuff, you might as well kind of plan ahead a little bit, because that's what happens with that Target expense, is that things sneak up on us. And then you're like, oh my God, I need water shoes. I didn't think about water shoes.
Right.
And then you need water shoes in 2 different sizes. Kids grow so fast. Then in one summer, you're going to go through 2 sets of water shoes. Right. Whatever it is. That's just one of the examples of items on my Target list.
Right. That's what it is. And so I think you're right about like get on these groups beforehand, because it doesn't start when they're 1 or even 6 months. It's like immediate. Okay, so what about people who are just starting out of college or younger, and they are interested in living frugally and retiring early? So there's a whole movement called FIRE, or Financially Independent Retire Early. Tell me more about that.
I love the FIRE movement. I work with a lot of people who are on FIRE, and I work with a lot of people who simply want to make work optional. Maybe they want to take a short sabbatical, or they want to step down from a high-income, high-stress job, do something a little different.
Right.
I run into that quite a bit, and that's usually kind of a mid-career change. And I absolutely love it. And the frugality required really is dependent on how much income you make in the first place, how young you want to be when you FIRE, and what kind of other income sources are you creating. A lot of people really focus on the real estate side, and I think that absolutely works. However, it's so work intensive that it's not for me, and it may not be for other people who are not quite as passionate about it. So that's where I say time value of money is a huge factor. The dollars you put away early on, and as they compound, it just makes everything easier.
Right.
Later down the road.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's interesting because I know for myself, I just admitted this on my YouTube show, but that I didn't start saving until I was age 29 and a half. And I was like, I want 20s fun. And like there's specific, like you have more fun in your 20s. And actually, it was, the way I looked at it is that you could take flexibility at different times in your life, and I'm going to take it when I'm 20. Like, I'm not going to retire early. I'm going to do this, travel, etc., inconsistent unemployment and a lot of travel in my 20s. So, and it's worked out. But I would have more money. I'd have more money if I hadn't done that. I definitely would.
We have the same memory.
Yeah. And so it's like, when do you want your flexibility? You can't have it, like, from my perspective, it was like, I can't have it all the time. I'll take it now. The other thing is that if you just, the problem with my approach was, like, what if you say that, but then you don't start saving? Then that's a problem. But, yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question I have for you is, what about 401ks? 401ks and Roths. Tell me what you advise people with them.
Okay. So once again, I think that there's a rule of thumb, and then it's subjective based on the individual, of course. However, most 401ks, the default is that the money that you put into it is going to be pre-tax money. Therefore, you get a deduction, right? Well, if your income is under $100,000, that deduction may not be as powerful as the tax-free growth available to you if you do the Roth version of the 401k. But no matter what, I think if you have a 401k or a 403b or a 457, same thing, then take advantage of it. And I see a lot of people, especially in industries that have pensions like teachers or city workers, who think that the pension is the only thing they need, and they don't get into those optional retirement plans at a super young age, which is a huge, not mistake necessarily, but missed opportunity for some serious growth. It gives you a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
And so I say, pour that money into that particular vehicle, because it has one of the highest contribution limits too. And if that works for your budget to be able to put $20,500 away, do it. Absolutely do it. What are your thoughts?
I agree with you. I liked your $100,000 limit for Ross, because I think, that might be like exactly perfect in every situation, but it's a really good guideline. And and especially when you're under 30, but maybe under 35 or 40, I really love Ross. Thanks, Kacie, and I really appreciate you being on the Chicago Money Show.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, my name is Bridget Sullivan-Mermel, and I own a fee-only financial planning firm. Check out the show's website at chicagomoneyshow.com. There you can see our previous episodes, and you can sign up for a newsletter so you can get a heads up before upcoming shows. If you've got questions on this episode or for future episodes, please email us. It's ask@chicagomoneyshow.com. Thanks for watching.